Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome our home church. Let us sing a song, holy song. Page number 5, Spring Song of Eden. Number 5, Spring Song of Eden.
Come, all ye friends, to the Garden of Eden, where the spring blossoms are best. Joyfully singing together our song, friends in our Eden regain. Here in the garden together we'll meet, singing new songs of joy. Come, all ye friends, to the Garden of Eden, singing new songs of delight. Joyfully dancing together with song, friends in our Eden rejoice. Here in the garden together we'll dance, singing new songs of joy. Come, all ye friends, to the Garden of Eden, where joy and happiness reign. Joyfully sharing together our love, here in the Garden of Peace. Come, we'll come to the garden, our friends, singing new songs of joy, singing new songs of joy, singing new songs of joy.
Thank you. Next song, page 42, All the Land That I Love. 42, All the Land That I Love.
I have been wandering all over this world, looking for something I just couldn't find. Seems like I'm moving in search of myself. Where will I find my peace of mind? All the lives that I love, all the seas that I sailed, miles and years go by me. It's been such a lonely journey. We
159, sailing with our father.
If the trip you're traveling gets long, wishing for a new day to come, when the sun rises in the morning, we'll set sail and move on, and we'll be sailing with our father. You know his ship will never sway. On you, on the horizon, we found the promised land today. Look out with joy in your eyes. The winds of truth will guide our way, leaving behind the raging sea. On waves of love we'll sail away, and we'll be sailing with our father. You know his ship will never sway. Oh, new home on the horizon, we found the promised land today. Darkness it always turns to light. The promised land is inside. He is our guiding star by night, and in the day our bright sunlight. And we'll be sailing with our father. You know his ship will never sway. Oh, new home on the horizon, we found the promised land today. Sailing with our father. You know his ship will never sway. Oh, new home on the horizon, we found the promised land today. We found the promised land today. We found the promised land today.
Thank you. Let's just stand up about the happy parents card and two parents. Today, Sunday morning, June 25th, 2017. Let's just bow the happy parents and two parents. Tombe. Hello. Join me prayer. 사랑하시는 하나님 아버지, 참부모님, 안녕하십니까? Most lovely heavenly parents, God, and true parents, we are so grateful to receive a new day and new week. Last night, in the Bridgeport, Connecticut, we had a wonderful firework. We are early celebration of independence. We are so grateful. This year was so amazing firework. It was wonderful and beautiful and so louder also. And many people came to celebrate. We are so grateful to our forefathers built this land with hope and freedom and his righteousness, heavenly parents. We are toward in creating kingdom of heaven. But yet we are not achieved yet, heavenly parents. We see that this world, many kiosks we can see from the news, heavenly parents. England, Paris, and so Europe and some other place in North Korea and Japan and China. the leadership of the world meeting and try to negotiate each country can make peace and unity. But we can see that the fighting going on. Every parents, you created the world of beauty and harmony, but reality is the destruction and the war and the circumstances not good right now, Heavenly Parents. We seek your kingdom and your truth, Heavenly Parents. Each of our day, you giving us the morning sunrise and beautiful air. We are deeply in our heart. We ask you to guide us, Heavenly Parents. We belong to this world, Heavenly Parents. We want to strive to your beautiful kingdom. Love is flow in this air and people, and finally make peace, Heavenly Parents. But within us is still going on the fighting. We have to win our battle inside of us and outside of us. We know that our selfishness or laziness, or even we didn't know, we sometimes lie, and we're coming out of the unknown place, Heavenly Parents. We have to sail with you, Heavenly Parents, with your truth and righteous. You guide us to kingdom of heaven. Please guide today. We can learn something new, and we can act with it, and we can produce goodness around us. Please guide this week, and we welcome to the new message, and we can strive ourselves to be good and loving and serve this world. Please guide our pastor to give us the message from you, and we are so grateful to receive a new week. Please bless this new week. I report in the name of Ramanga Tamik Montanaro, Central Blessed Family, Aju. Amen. Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome our Pastor Montanaro.
So it's funny, I have a lot to say today. I had to drive a 3-hour drive this morning, a 3.5-hour drive, so I was not really prepared. And I also, to be honest, since I lost my job, I've been thinking a lot about our mission here and reflecting a lot. I've been going through a lot emotionally and spiritually, trying to understand and digest what happened. And it's been hard to forgive the people that caused me to lose my job. Although I understand why they did it in some ways. I understand that, these sermons created controversy in the community that I was teaching in, and that it was difficult for some people to go beyond that controversy to just see me as a teacher. I never brought my beliefs into the classroom, although I was accused of that. I never did that. But it was hard for people who had seen me online in this role to wipe that away and just see me as a teacher of language. And so I understand that people can't, if they can't overcome something, sometimes you just have to accept that they can't overcome it. I mean, it depends, the situation, but I understand why they had to do what they did. At the same time, I knew that I had done all I could to keep my teaching clear and good, and I think I was a good teacher. And I think many of my students have expressed that online in some of their comment sections and that kind of thing. So I feel that I did a good job, and it's hard when you've done something the best way you can to have that taken away from you, because some people can't understand you because they can't accept what you're doing. That's hard. And So I've been struggling a lot, and today I almost didn't want to give a sermon. I thought, well, let's just do, maybe I'll do a prayer. I'll just post online that I didn't have a sermon ready today. But I just prayed for a few minutes, and several thoughts came into my mind, and right away a sermon like crystallized. And it's very amazing. I want to just give a plug to home church for those of our church members, or even outside people who don't belong to the unification movement, who are enjoying what I'm saying about home church. I want to encourage everyone who is hearing these sermons to understand that when you make a determination to open your mouth and to speak for God, that God will take care of you. I am amazed at how much God has been taking care of me these last 4 years and a half, actually almost 5 years now, we've been doing home church. And every week, if I want to give a sermon, if I allow myself to give a sermon, if I say I'm going to give a sermon, determine myself to give a sermon, there is a sermon waiting there. And for those of you who are struggling with content, maybe you don't think you can speak as well as I do. I'm a good speaker. I've been told that by many people. I've been asked to be MC at many events. I am a good speaker in terms of language, right? I've learned like 5 different languages. So I know that I'm good with words, and I know that I'm a good speaker. I understand that. And that definitely plays in to my being able to be a good pastor or speaker. But it isn't that. You have to know that there's so much content that Father gave us. Today we're going to read 2 small chapters from Father's autobiography. That's what one of the inspirations I got, is to just read this. But the first inspiration I got came from the date. Because most of you can't read Korean, I'm going to make this simpler for you. Is that better? That's how you pronounce this in Korean. Anyone who has studied a little bit of Korean knows these are numbers. This is 6, this is 2, this is 5. In the Chinese pronunciation or writing of the numbers, meaning Koreans can count using their own native alphabet, which we learn in Taekwondo, right? You learn in Taekwondo, you learn 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷, 다섯, 여섯, 일곱, 여덟, 아홉, 열, 열한, 열둘, 열셋, like that. And you can count up to 100, you can count like that. When you're counting in Korean, you use that number system. This is the Chinese character-based system. And I can't write the Chinese characters. Maybe, Oma, you want to do it? Write the Chinese characters for 6625. Underneath the 6 and the 2 and the 5. So this is the Chinese characters for 6 and 2, which is pretty easy. That's 2 lines. And 5. Okay? And you know, it's very interesting. The 5 has 5 strokes in it. So you know how when we're doing tallies, we go like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, right? This is how the Koreans will do it. They'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, like that. And they do that again and again and again, and they make a bunch of these little guys to count by 5s. That's very interesting. So, these are Chinese characters, and the pronunciation of these, which is very similar to Japanese, ichi, ni, san, shi, go. So in Korean, it's il, I, sam, sa, o. And then yu. And roku in Japanese. So they're very similar pronunciation because they're using the same Chinese characters with slightly different pronunciations. I don't know how the Chinese say those same words. Can you just say it in Chinese?
I only know 5.
Go ahead.
Yi, ar, san, su, wu.
See, it's very similar. Ni, ar, san, su, wu. So all the 3 countries that use the Chinese characters pronounce them similarly, with different pronunciation slightly. Sort of like in our language, when Latin gets used, we pronounce them slightly differently, but they're the same words. Like important in English becomes important in French, importante in Italian, and importante in Spanish too. So they're the same word basically, different pronunciation. So this means 625. What does that mean then? Why did I put this up on the board? 625.
in the Korean language, the meaning is innocent.
No, that's different. That's father's number in prison. That's different.
Different.
You know where this comes from? Well, first of all, what day is the date? It's June 25th, so it's 625. This was the day after 5 years from the end of World War II, after 5 years from liberation from Japan. Korea had been occupied for 40 years from the Ulsa Protection Treaty, which the Japanese forced the Queen of Korea to sign in 1905, which began their takeover of Korea and began their takeover of Asia.
25.
Then from that point, 1905 until 1945, August 15th, when Japan unconditionally surrendered to the United States at the end of World War II because of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At that point, 40 years of occupation of Korea ended, and the Japanese were forced to leave Korea, to flee, and Korea was free. But just like in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, which was very small still, but very strong and very ideologically intense with communism, they had positioned themselves in Eastern Europe and in Asia to take over these countries that were suddenly liberated from occupation. In Eastern Europe, they met with an aging Prime Minister Winston Churchill and an almost dead President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at Yalta. And Stalin, who was much younger and healthier, was more robust. He basically pushed through his policy of helping Eastern Europe to get back on its feet after World War II and after the German occupation of Eastern Europe. So Russia, or Soviet Union, took over the restoration on getting back on its feet of Poland, of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, of Hungary, of Czechoslovakia, which now is the Czech Republic and Slovakia, of Romania, of all of the Baltic states. I mean, they basically took over all of Eastern Europe. And after they went behind what's called now the Iron Curtain, they never came out. They were forced into communist dictatorships. Communist dictators, puppet dictators were put in place. And for 40 years, all those nations were under communist dictatorship. They tried to fight out. Czechoslovakia had a rebellion, I think in 1968. In 1954, I think it was Hungary tried to rebel, but they were crushed. Soviet tanks destroyed. The same thing happened in Korea. When the Japanese left, there was a vacuum, a power vacuum, because the Japanese had controlled all the leadership positions. So when they left, all the Japanese leaders were gone, and even the puppets that they had put in power were sellouts to the Japanese, had gotten money and big houses from the Japanese in order to control their own people, the Koreans that had been willing to do that. They were pushed out of power too by the Koreans, so there was nobody in power. So Kim Il-sung, the Soviet Union, did the same thing. He said, we'll help with North Korea, meaning anything north of the 38th parallel, which is just north of Seoul. So anything from the Seoul north right to the border with China and a little bit with Russia in the very north, that was all taken over by the Soviet Union. And Kim Il-sung was put in as a puppet. And his son Kim Jong-il, after he died in 1992, 93, he was the leader, dictator for another 10, 15, 20 years until he died, and now his son Kim Jong-un, the grandson of the original dictator, has kept the lineage. It's the only communist dictatorship that has passed on father to son in the world. It's because Koreans have such a sense of lineage, and they honored the Kim family as if they were from God, from heaven. So this is the problem we have in North Korea right now. But anyway, North Korea, right from 1945, they began amassing Soviet arms and weaponry on the border with South Korea. They were intending to take over by force. And in 1948, they closed the border basically. They turned it into a border between like two countries. They refused to allow open elections because they knew they would lose, because there are only at that time 25 million people in the north, and there were 45 million people in the south. So they just knew by numbers, if there was an open election between one candidate from the south and one candidate from the north, the south would win. So they refused open elections, they closed the border, and they basically separated the countries. The United States was responsible for the south. What happened then was for 2 years, and Father was in prison at this time. Father had gone to North Korea in 1946 because South Korea had rejected him. And so he went north, and he was tortured, imprisoned, many things, terrible things. And finally he was thrown in Hungnam prison, right on the eastern border of North Korea, as a slave labor camp, a gulag, like the gulags in Russia, the concentration camps. It was a concentration camp. And he was there for 2 years and 8 months. He was there from like February, I think, of 1948 until October of 1950. Okay, so what's happening now? He's in prison. He has fulfilled his responsibility to suffer for the failure of Korea to unite with him. And now he has to get out of prison, but he's there for a 5-year prison sentence. So North Korea now amasses tanks and weaponry on the border. South Korea is almost defenseless. They have no army, basically. They have a joke of an army. They have not developed any military, any weaponry, because they believed that the United States was protecting them. They didn't have any designs on attacking North Korea. But communist North Korea had very strong designs about attacking South Korea. They say to their own people, to this day, that South Korea attacked North Korea. That's why they entered the Korean War. But anyone who knows real history, not the bizarre, wacko history that the North Koreans create to lie to their own people, knows that on June 25th of 1950, what is that now? 67 years ago, North Korea, on that morning, they suddenly attacked South Korea. They went across the river, they attacked South Korea, they brought tanks and thousands of troops, and within days, they had overrun Seoul. They had pushed back the weak South Korean defense, and the minuscule amount of American military that was there is more of a peacekeeping force. Down the whole peninsula, within just a few days, they had arrived. The South Korean military and the United States forces were pushed back into a little corner of South Korea near Busan. Basically, a little perimeter around the city of Busan, which is the southeasternmost city in Korea. And the North Korea basically won the war in almost a few weeks. But the United Nations, which was responsible, this was the first time the United Nations got involved in a war. Because the United Nations, remember, was formed in 1948. Well, in 1945, you can say it was formed right at the end of World War II. And it took a while for it to gain power. It had never used its peacekeeping forces. But this was the first time that they had to vote, should we send forces to stop North Korea from invading the South? Of course, the Soviet Union had a position on the Security Council, which is the 5 nations that can control the direction of the United Nations. And they would have vetoed it. And even one veto means that the United Nations is paralyzed, which is what happened for all 50 years of the Cold War. Every time the United States said to do something, the Soviet Union would veto it. And every time the Soviet Union tried to push something through, the United States would veto it. So nothing happened. The United Nations could only do humanitarian work. They could never almost protect any country from invasion during the Cold War. But on this day, for some reason, and I've heard different stories, the Soviet ambassador was offended by something, or he got sick and he had a cold, and he did not attend the meeting, and they did the vote in his absence, and they voted to send troops. It was a miracle to send troops to South Korea. 16 nations responded. And those 16 nations are still honored by the Korean people with flags and memorials and things like this, because they sent their own people to fight and die on Korean soil. By far the largest troops were coming from the United States. By far. I think we lost about 30,000 men in Korea, in the Korean War. Yook Ee Oh is how Koreans refer to the Korean War. They don't say the Korean War in Korean. They don't say, you know, the Civil War or the attack of the North. They say Yook Ee Oh. That's all they say is the date. 625. So today, when I saw that date, I thought of Korea, and I thought of the Korean War, and I thought of Father and where he was. He was in prison in North Korea at that time. And that war, even though it cost millions of lives, was ultimately the reason Father could be liberated. Because after being pushed all the way back to down to the south, the United Nations did a miraculous thing led by General Douglas MacArthur, who was the hero of the Japanese theater of World War II. MacArthur had a brilliant and bold plan to land his troops and ships not on the south, not at Busan where it was safe, and have a land war pushing back, bloody land war pushing the forces back north. He said, that will cost us millions of lives. Let's not do that. He said, the waters in the bay, or the area of Korea that is the Yellow Sea, basically. It's called the Yellow Sea, Hwanghae, which is the West Coast Sea between Korea and China. Because of the way that the geography works, the tides swoop in and out of that very powerfully every day, twice a day. Around Incheon, which is right near the northern part of that bay, you know, Korea's here. So this is China, and here's Korea, like this. And this is North Korea here, and the border with China. This is the 38th parallel. Here's Seoul. Here's Incheon right there. The forces were down in Busan. Instead of landing here, he went up into this bay, where the tides go 36 feet. Here in Bridgeport, our tides go 6 to 8 feet up and down. You know, it's about this much. It's a lot. You can see that when low tide really is low, you know, you have these mud flats, right, going out for a quarter of a mile. But can you imagine the water going down by 36 feet? You could probably walk on the mud flats in Long Island Sound if they were 36 feet halfway across the Long Island Sound. I mean, the water doesn't get 36 feet deep for another mile or 2 or 3 out there. And that's what happens. So in order to land a force at Incheon, you would have to come in at high tide when the water was up. You'd have to land your boats, deposit your men and weapons, and then quickly get out before the tide went out again. Otherwise your boats would just be stranded in the mud. And then they would be sitting targets for the enemy's fire. So nobody wanted to do this. Everyone thought it was foolhardy, it was crazy. But MacArthur was brilliant, and he was confident, and he was guided, I think, by God. And he said, no, we can do this. And he did it. And the weather cooperated. It was foggy and rainy, and it was amazing. And basically, he was able to land an entire fleet right here at Incheon. And the communist supply lines were very thin. They hadn't left many troops here. They'd left a few troops to keep the local people. But local people didn't have any guns. This is why Young Jinim is promoting us to have weapons. He thinks that we should all be armed. Every family should be armed and know how to use weapons safely and carefully and well. Because in case of any kind of military attack, whether it's from within or from without, or government oppression, or some kind of dictatorship, whatever, the citizenry needs to be able to defend itself. That's why the Second Amendment to the Constitution says the right of a free people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the right to form a militia, the right to defend yourself, and especially from government. The reason for the Second Amendment was they were afraid if the government ever became too powerful, the government would take away the rights of the people. And so they gave the rights to bear arms to the people in the Second Amendment. The Korean people didn't have that, and none of them had guns. So all you needed were a few soldiers to keep everyone in line. And that's all the North Koreans had left for about 500 miles down through here, 400, 500 miles. So when he landed here, there was no opposition. And in days, he was able to reclaim Seoul, cut off the supply lines, and begin a two-pronged attack going north and also going south and doing a cleanup job. The South Koreans were attacking from here, and also UN forces were here. And then the force that was landing here, they began to do a pincer movement. And basically, without any supply, without food, without weapons, without arms coming down, without bullets, these forces quickly had to surrender. And it was a brilliant move. And it basically turned the tide of the Korean War in just a few days. Of course, it was very bloody still, because the North Koreans were fighting for their lives. But the North Koreans, then MacArthur began pushing, and he was able to push right back to I think it's called the Yalu River, on the border with, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's the Yalu River is right here. And he was able to push the communist forces right back to here, and even into China. That's when the Chinese got involved. The Chinese sent over 1 million troops, armed with pitchforks. And they didn't have guns. They didn't have any weapons, but they were forced by the communists to attack, to be like cannon fodder, just to run into the bullets of the. It was butchery, and it was awful. And the troops were sickened. They were watching these farmers basically coming across the border from China, and they were mowing them down with their weapons. Millions of them, just hundreds of thousands were dying. MacArthur said, we have to drop the bomb. He wanted to drop the atomic bomb on China to stop this. To show them, you keep it going, you're dead. But Truman pulled him out of the war. They fired him for wanting to do this. And because of that, for 3 years the war raged back and forth. The communists pushed them back to the 30th parallel, and the war raged until finally a ceasefire. The war is not over. It's never ended with a truce or a treaty. It's just a ceasefire. Has basically been reigning more or less well, although the North Koreans keep shooting at the South Koreans and blowing up boats, and they've sent troops, boats to kidnap people from Japan to use as forced labor in North Korea. It's just terrible. They're terrible. They're horrible. But the war stopped at the 38th parallel in 1953. In 1950, when 625, when this war began, Father was up here in Hungnam, a slave labor camp, picking up 1,300 bags, 40 kilograms, that's 88 pounds, bags of ammonium fertilizer that the North Koreans were using to make weapons, because you can use ammonia to make explosives. So they were having the prisoners mine it out. The ammonia was eating their fingers away and their hands and their bodies, so you could see their flesh exposed, bleeding and sores, and you could see their bones. That's how bad it was. Every day Father had to pick up 1,300 bags. He took the hardest job on his team of 10 people. And he had to carry them to the train and load them onto the train. 1,300 bags. This was what Father was doing for 2 years and 8 months. When the war broke out, he'd been there for 2 years and 4 months doing this. As the North Koreans backed up, they were afraid that they would be caught with this slave labor camp and the emaciated concentration camp prisoners. So they began doing what Hitler did at the end of World War II. He ordered the murder of all the prisoners in the concentration camps, and they were burning their bodies in the ovens, so there would be no evidence of the crime he had been committing. It didn't work. The evidence was all over the place, but that's what Hitler was having them do. The same thing Kim Il-sung ordered: kill all the prisoners. So Father's number, this is what Oma was talking about. Father's number was 596, and in the Chinese characters, Ogu-ryu. And Ogu-ryu sounds like the Chinese characters for unjust imprisonment. That was Father's number in prison, Ogu-ryu. And he had been in prison for 2 years and 4 months here when the war broke out. 4 months later, that was after the Korean force had come down here and then been cut off and pushed up. At this point, the Marines now were bombing the coast of Korea at all the industrial cities. And Hungnam was a major industrial city, and a war producer for weapons. So the Marines were bombing the city from the sea. And these bombs were landing like rain all around. And the communists had killed right up to 590, I believe it was, or 592. Father was then first on line to be killed the next day. They were marching the prisoners out in teams, making them dig their own graves, shooting them into the graves, and then they were bringing another team out to bury them and then shoot them like that. So they were basically having these teams go out and bury themselves, shooting them in the head. So if Father would have been killed the next day, that night, God gave him a revelation, and he told the prisoners, follow me wherever you want. The people that he had gained 12 disciples in prison without speaking a word of the divine principle, just by his standard. And we'll talk about that when we read the Father's autobiography today. The spiritual power that he gained through his absolute sacrifice. The next day, the bombing got so intense that night and the next day that the communist guards fled. They just left. They ran. And the prisoners were free. But the bombs were dropping everywhere. And Father said, follow me, stay close to me. And everywhere he went, the bombs would not fall. Then he would run, and a bomb would fall right where they were. And he would run again, and a bomb would fall right where they were. And so he knew, he was being told by the spiritual where the bombs were going to land. And he was running to keep away from them. Finally, they were able to flee the prison, get out when the guards left, and they were able to survive. Everyone went to their own home, or they fled south. Everyone was basically running south from here. So they were trying to go straight this way to get out of North Korea. But Father, he went here. He went west to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. He had promised his disciples, before he was arrested in 1948, for 2 years he'd been trying to preach and gain disciples, and many people had come to follow him. And he promised them, I'll be back. So he went back. He didn't want to abandon them. And for 40 days, he stayed in Pyongyang waiting to see if anyone would come. But they had already fled. Only Wonpil Kim Wonpil, and an old lady that was too old to travel, and she said, no, you go, I'll be fine, I'll be here. So she stayed in North Korea. But Father took Wonpil Kim and one man who had been following him, who had a broken leg. The communists had broken his leg. And he had a cast on his leg. And they pushed him on an old bicycle without tires all the way. They started walking. And they walked all the way through. They actually didn't go to Seoul. They went down through Daegu and through the mountains. And they finally made it to Busan. 600 miles. And that was in December and January of 1950. 51. So then Father started a church in the hills outside of Busan, in a little hut that he made out of mud and stones and cardboard boxes that the U.S. Army had left behind for their ration boxes. You know, they'd bring boxes with cans of food and things. Well, he took these boxes apart, the cardboard, and he made a roof out of that and walls. So he made a little house about this big, a little hut. And that's where he and Wonpil Kim lived. From that beginning, he started a unification church. Now, 66 years ago. That was the beginning of our movement, 66 years ago. A mud hut on the hills outside of Busan, so filled with refugees. He went after that, after he gained some disciples and some momentum. They moved up to Daegu, where they stayed for several months, working in Daegu, and then they moved to Seoul. And Father bought a little church in Seoul, in Champadong, which is a district of Seoul that is very kind of old. It's an old district of Seoul. And he bought a house that was almost free because the Japanese had used it, and it was ruined. It had dirt on all the walls. They wondered what it was being used for. It was just weird. It was like probably a torture house or something the Japanese had used for some kind of like prison or something like that. And then no one wanted it, so they bought this house for their church. And they spent 4 days cleaning it with a lye solution to get the house ready to be used as a church. So from that, let's read Father's autobiography. And for you at home, I'll put the link up. We're going to read 2 small chapters in here. This will tie back in with what I was talking about in the beginning, about losing my job and the feelings I've had Father experienced something even more intense than that by 1,000 times. But let's read this now. New buds grow on scorched branches. This is page 128 in my version. The online version, I think, is a few pages different because of the photographs, but I'll tell you what that is online. You can look on the commentary section under the video on the YouTube channel, and you'll see the page number of the online version and the link. But on this is 128. Does everyone find it? New buds grow on scorched branches. You all have it? Okay, let's read. Okay, so now I'm going to sit down. Sorry, check. All right. We're going to read 2 chapters. It's a lot. I was toying with the idea of not giving a sermon today, again, because I was reflecting a lot. But this came to me, and as I was reading these chapters, I thought how valuable and how meaningful these 2 chapters are. So let's read together. Page 128, new buds grow on scorched branches, and then we'll read the next chapter, which is, we are trained by our wounds. You can tell by the titles, scorched branches, wounds. The Father's talking about the time of persecution in South Korea. We're going to skip the first 5 years of persecution. We're going to skip to the point where he's been accused of women dancing naked in the church. He's been arrested. He's been thrown in Sodaemun prison. And he's going to talk about his prison time in South Korea and how he developed out of that. And even the opposition of his first wife, who was a Christian woman that had married him in 1944, and they had a child together. And suddenly he went to North Korea. He was told by God, go to North Korea. And he couldn't even tell his wife. So she was waiting for him, and when he came back to Busan, she met him there. But she demanded that he quit his mission, because she stopped believing in him as the Messiah. She demanded he quit his mission and just take care of her and the son, which he couldn't do. And so this is why she was demanding a divorce, and she was trying to really stop the church that he was building. So let's read now about this difficult time in our church's history. This is about 1955, 1956, this kind of time. This is after the many students joined at Ewha University, the most important women's university in Korea. Hundreds of students and professors joined, and then they were forced to leave by the administration. Only 14 students and 5 professors stayed after the persecution started against them. So this is a lot's been going on now for 5 years as Father so powerfully is speaking and teaching the truth. For our members who are watching, many people are struggling now because they can't understand Father's marriage before and his relationships before, because he had to restore original sin, which was a sexual sin. And they may doubt Father, but they should read. All of us should read. Everyone should read this book. Because when you understand the kind of dedication and sincerity and intensity that Father was giving to his life, you cannot doubt that he was the Messiah, and you cannot doubt that he was guided by God. So let's read through this. New buds grow on scorched branches. The detectives of the Special Intelligence Section of the Office of Public Order, who raided our church and took me into custody, brought me to the Cheongbu police station. I was outraged to be charged with draft evasion. He was charged with draft. This is the level of stupidity that powerful people go to destroy somebody who they want to destroy. Father was in a concentration camp in North Korea when South Korea initiated the draft. In 625, when Father was when the war started, the South Koreans started the draft. Well, Father didn't report for draft duty because he was in prison in North Korea. And they accused him of draft evasion. This is the outrage that people in power sometimes commit with the power that they have. I was outraged to be charged with draft evasion, but said nothing. I had a mouth to speak, but I was never given the chance to say a word. Some saw my silence in the face of unjust treatment and called me spineless. I endured this sort of name-calling in silence as well, believing that this too must be a path that had been given to me. If this was the path I must follow to reach my objective, then there was nothing I could do about it. Because I followed such a clear path, I could not be defeated. The more I was attacked, the more care I took to act more honorably than anyone. Once I made this decision in my heart, the police had no control over me. When the detective was writing his report, I was guiding him how to write it. Why don't you include this content, I would say. And up here, you need to write it this way. He did as I said. Each phrase that I told him to write was correct. But when the detective put them all together, he found that they led him to the opposite conclusion from what he had intended. He became angry and tore up the report. On July 13, 1955, on the 6th day of incarceration in Cheongbu police station, I was placed in prison once again. This time, it was the Seodaemun prison in Seoul, the Great South Gate prison. Seoul, like many of the Asian cities, was built with a wall around it, and it had a great east gate, a great south gate, a great west gate, and a great north gate. So it had gates. I don't know if it had a north gate actually, but it had three gates, south, east, and west. Seodaemun, actually Seoul is the west gate, the Great West Gate prison. So there's Namdaemun, which is the south gate, and Seodaemun, which is the west gate. Dongdaemun is the east gate. So, again, on July 13, 1955, on the 6th day of incarceration in Cheongbu police station, I was placed in prison once again. This time it was the Seodaemun prison in Seoul. I was shackled, but I was neither ashamed nor sorrowful. You know what shackles are, boys? Shackles are like handcuffs. They're like chains that are put on your wrists and hands so you can't run away and you can't touch anything or do anything. I was shackled, but I was neither ashamed nor sorrowful. Life in prison was no obstacle for me. It might have served as a motivation to stimulate a heart of great anger, but it never blocked my path. For me, it was a way to gather additional capital for my future activities. In other words, Father was using this experience to gain strength and power, and even using the anger to make him more strong for his future activities. I overcame life in prison by telling myself, I am not someone to die in prison. I cannot die. This is only a springboard for me to take a great leap toward the world of liberation. It is the rule in this world and the law of heaven that that which is evil will fall and that which is good will rise up. Even if I must go into a dung heap, I will not fail if I maintain a pure heart. As I was being led away in shackles, some women passed by, looked at me askance, and twisted their faces in disapproval. They exuded the feeling that I was grotesque even to look at, because they believed I was the leader of a sex cult. But I was neither afraid nor ashamed. It's very interesting, even the accusations that were made against me at my school were related in some way to sex. They said I was using sexual innuendo in my teaching, which is not true. I was talking about the yin and yang, masculine and feminine, which is very evident in language, especially in Latin languages which have masculine and feminine nouns. So I was using the yin and yang principle to talk about some of the words to help them remember masculine and feminine. They accused me of bringing sex into the classroom. Very interesting, isn't it? That Father was accused of sex. And also Jesus. If you understand the accusations against Jesus, he had all these women around him that were willing to die for him. Mary Magdalene was weeping on his feet and cleaning the dirt off his feet with her tears and her hair, which may seem amazing from a modern perspective that a woman would be willing to do that. But even Jesus' own disciples accused him, saying, Master, do you not know what kind of woman this is? Why do you let her touch your feet? His own disciples couldn't understand it. They thought it was improper. So what do you think the Jewish people felt about Jesus, letting all these women of ill repute, former prostitutes, hang around with him? The rumors were flying around Jesus. It's interesting that the Messiah has to fight rumors about sex, because that's exactly what he has to clean up. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back to previous sermons or the Divine Principle lectures that are online at our website. But sexual misconduct was the problem of the fall. And that is why that is the one problem that no one's been able to solve. Even deeply religious people have been tormented with sexual misconduct. And it's been the downfall of many, many great leaders. So Father came to clean that up. So it's ironic. I mean, talk about the definition of the word irony for you English majors out there. It's ironic that Father would be accused of sexual misconduct when he came to clean that up. So they believed I was the leader of a sex cult. But I was neither afraid nor ashamed. Even if filthy words were used to harass me and our church, I would not be shaken. Of course, I had normal feelings. Outwardly, I maintained my dignity, but there were many times when I felt stifled and sorrowful to the marrow of my bones. Each time I felt my heart weaken, I endured by telling myself, I am not someone to just die in prison. See, he was tortured. He's not mentioning this here because he doesn't want to talk about these things. In fact, he never told his disciples. But his disciples would come at night and they would pray for him and they would hear. And I heard from one Bill Kim who was outside of the prison. They heard Father being beaten, being tortured. They could hear. And the guards saying his name, and cursing him and hitting him. And they could hear him, the groans and the beating that he was receiving. South Korean prison was not a piece of cake. They tortured Father for 3 months. So when he said, I am not someone to just die in prison, he's speaking seriously here. I will stand again. I am certain of this. I redoubled my determination, saying, I am taking all the pain into myself. I am carrying the entire burden for our church. One could easily expect that my imprisonment would mean the end of our church, with all members going their separate ways. Instead, members came to visit me every day. In some cases, they even fought over who would come to see me first. Visitations were only allowed after 8 a.m., but members would line up and wait outside the prison gate from early in the morning. The more people cursed me, and the more bitter my situation became, the more people would line up to visit me, encourage me, and shed tears for me. I did not even greet them with great emotion. In fact, I would rebuff them, saying things like, why do you come and make such a fuss? Still, they followed me in tears. This was their expression of faith and love. They were not attached to me because I knew how to speak smoothly or eloquently. They liked me because they knew about the love that lay deep in my heart. Our members recognized my true heart. I will never be able to forget the ones who followed me, even as I was forced to stand shackled in court. I will always remember their expressions as they sobbed to see me sitting at the defendant's table. The guards at the prison were amazed. How does this man make those people become so crazy? They wondered when they saw our members flock to the prison. He is not their husband, and none of them is his wife. He is not their son. How can they be so devoted to him? So you see by Father's words when he talks about husband, son, and they're not his wife, that most of them were women. Just like with Jesus. There weren't many men among them, but there were mostly women, because I think women understand the Messiah before men do. Because women understand things out of heart, not so much out of their head. Men are often calculating. When they look, well, naturally, many men would look at Jesus as a competitor. Men are competitive. They see Jesus and he's getting all this attention from women. They get jealous. There's jealousy. There's competitiveness. And they can't feel the love that he has as much as a woman can feel. So many women followed Jesus. Many women followed Father in the beginning as well. So the guards were wondering, he's not their husband. None of them is his wife. He's not their son. How can they be so devoted to him? In at least one case, a guard commented, "We heard that Moon was a dictator and exploited people, but it is so clear that this is not true." This guard became a member and followed our way. Finally, after I was 3 months in bondage, the court found me not guilty and I was released. On the day of my release, the chief warden and all the prison section chiefs gave me a formal send-off. Within 3 months, all became part of our unification family. All the guards and section chiefs joined. You have to look at that. And you have to understand that if Father were a leader of a sex cult, or if he were a selfish, evil man in any way, nobody would join it after seeing him in prison and going through torture and going through this kind of treatment. But they all saw the real man when everything was thrown away, when everything was lost. The reason their hearts turned toward me was simple. Once they could see me up close, they realized I was not at all the person portrayed by the rumors they'd heard. As it turned out, the false rumors circulating in society actually helped our evangelical efforts. When I had been led away by the police, all media and society had made a huge fuss. It was front page news. Sex cult leader arrested. Moon in prison. Front page. But when I was found not guilty and released, they were silent. They didn't retract all their headlines. They didn't put headlines, Moon released, free. No. The only report on my not guilty verdict and release was a 3-line story in an inconspicuous corner of the newspaper that read, Reverend Moon, not guilty, released. The vile rumors that had put the whole country in an uproar had been false, but this information was completely buried. Our members protested, saying, Reverend Moon, this is unjust. It makes us so angry we can't stand it. They wept in front of me, but I remained silent and quieted them. I never forgot the pain I experienced when harassed and subjected to all those false accusations. I endured, even when so many people stood against me, that I felt like there was no place left for me to stand in all of Korea. The sorrow I felt from this time has remained with me in a corner of my heart. No matter how loving and forgiving you can be, the pain you feel when people take away your freedom, or they abuse you, or they misunderstand you, and they accuse you unjustly, still remains in your heart. I still feel it. Even today, what happened to me at my job. But looking at Father's example, I can't say anything. My situation was minuscule compared to Father's. I might be a tree that is buffeted by the wind and rain and scorched by fire, but I would never be a tree that burns and dies. Even a branch that has been scorched will have new buds when the spring comes. If I continue on my way with humility and strong conviction, the day will surely come when the world will understand the value of what I do. Okay, second chapter. We are trained by our wounds. People rejected the new expression of truth I preached, calling it heresy. Jesus, born in the land of Judaism, likewise was accused of heresy and was thus crucified. By comparison, my persecution was not nearly as painful or unjust. I don't think that's true. I think Father's being humble here. I think Father's persecution was just as painful. Maybe not in this one instance, but throughout his life. 2 years and 8 months in a concentration camp. So many times tortured to the point of death. I think, objectively speaking, Father's suffering because of his adherence to the truth has been as great as Jesus's, if not more. But I think Father's being humble, and he loves Jesus, and he's recognizing Jesus' suffering. By comparison, my persecution was not nearly as painful or unjust. I could endure any amount of pain placed on my body. The charge of heresy against our church, however, was most unjust and more difficult for me. Some theologians who studied our church in its early days described our teachings as original and systematic. And if you guys take the time, I put up 16 videos or 15 videos covering the entire divine principle. You can read the divine principle. The link is on our website. You can hear my sermon, my lectures on it. I think you will agree there has never been a more systematic theology than the teaching of the unification movement. It's the most powerful theology I have ever encountered. And I have a master's degree at seminary. Nothing comes close. So to call our teaching heresy would be very painful for Father, because it's amazingly true. Please study for yourself if you have any doubt about that. Some theologians were prepared to accept them. This means that the magnitude of the heresy controversy surrounding our church was based on more than just theology. It had more to do with issues of power. So people in power, again, are afraid of losing their power. They're propped up by the churches. Many churches support the leadership of countries, of cities, of towns. In other words, leaders want to have the moral high ground. But if the belief system that they're basing their power on is passed by another teaching, if another teaching trumps their teaching, if another teaching overcomes their teaching, the base of their power then changes. If people begin to follow the new teaching, they will stop being loyal to the old leaders. This is what happened with Jesus. The scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees, the leaders of the Jewish people, especially the religious leaders, were the first ones to be scared by Jesus. They realized their power base would crumble if people followed Jesus' teaching. So they were the ones who conspired with the Romans to kill Jesus. First with Herod and then the Romans. It's often this way that the religious leaders are the ones who oppose a new religious movement. It makes sense. Most of our members had attended other churches before joining our church. This was the big reason our church was treated as an enemy by established churches. When Professor Yoon Young, one of the Ihwa professors, joined our church, she was taken to the police station to be interrogated. There, she discovered that some 80 Christian ministers had written letters to the authorities criticizing our church. It was not the case that we had done something wrong. Rather, we were seen as posing a threat to the power of certain people and institutions. It was their vague feelings of fear and their extreme factionalism that drove them in their efforts to suppress our church. People from many religious groups were attracted to our church and its new teachings. I would say to our members, "Why did you come here? Go back to your churches," and almost threaten them as I tried to chase them away. But they would soon return. The people who flocked to see me would not listen to anyone. They wouldn't listen to their teachers or their parents. They wanted to hear me speak. I wasn't paying them or feeding them, but they believed in what I taught and kept coming to me. I want to say something about Hyungjin here. He has no money to pay anyone to follow him, and yet more and more members of our church are coming to him. His mother, who is leading the church in Korea incorrectly, because she believes that she should take leadership, and her older brother, Hyunjin, who is also leading a section of our church. He went off with about 1/3 of the church assets, and mother is controlling another 2/3. They are paying people still in leadership. Both of them are paying people in their leadership. Hyunjin is not paying anyone. And yet, more and more people are coming to follow him. So that's a measure of the truth of what he's saying and of the correctness of his assertion that he is the one that Father appointed and anointed to have the authority to lead our church now. No one is following him because of him giving them any money. No one is supporting him because of that. So Father says, I wasn't paying them or feeding them, but they believed in what I taught and kept coming to me. The reason was that I opened a way for them to resolve their frustrations. Before I knew the truth, I too was frustrated. I was frustrated when I looked up to heaven and when I looked at the people around me. This is why I could understand the frustrations of the people who came to our church. They had questions about life, and they could not find answers. The Word of God I conveyed answered their questions with clarity. Young people who sought me out found answers in the words I spoke. They wanted to come to our church and join me on my spiritual journey, no matter how difficult it might be. I am the person who finds the way and opens it. I guide people along the path to heal broken families and rebuild the society, nation, and world so that we can finally return to God. People who come to me understand this. They want to go with me in search of God. How can people find fault with this? All we were doing was going in search of God. And for this, we were subjected to all manner of persecution and criticism. Unfortunately, now this is where Father's going to talk about his first wife, who was married to him. She was a Christian, a powerful Christian, and she believed that Father was the Messiah. But when Christianity came against Father in Korea, she was influenced by her family and her church, and she became negative toward Father. And she wanted him to quit his mission. Unfortunately, during the period when our church was involved in the heresy controversy, my wife made matters even more difficult for me. After our meeting in Busan, she and her relatives began to demand that either I quit the church immediately and start life with her and our son, or else give her a divorce. They even came to Sodaemun prison during my incarceration there to put the divorce papers before me, demanding that I place my stamp on them. I know how important marriage is in the effort to establish God's peaceful world, so I endured their demands in silence. She also subjected the members of our church to horrible abuse. Personally, I could endure. I did not mind her insults and reckless treatment of me, but it was difficult for me to stand by and watch her offensive behavior toward our members. She stormed into our church at all hours to curse our members, destroy church property, and take items that belonged to the church. When she came, it was impossible for us to take items that belonged to our church. She even threw water containing human feces at members. When she came, it was impossible for us to hold worship services. In the end, as soon as I came out of Sodaemun prison, I acceded to the demands of her family and placed my stamp on the divorce document. I was pushed into a divorce against my own principles. When I think of my former wife today, my heart goes out to her. The influence of her own family, which was strongly Christian, and the leadership of Korea's established churches had much to do with her behaving the way she did. She was so clear and firm in her commitment before we married. The way she changed gives us a lesson on how much we need to fear the power of social prejudice and established concepts. So if you read in the father's autobiography of his first marriage, he talks about how he warned her, my way is going to be very difficult. She refused. She had, I think, been matched to 17 or 18 or more people, and she rejected all of them. She was known as a very difficult person to match. But when she saw Father's picture, she refused any other matching. Even though when Father came to her, he said, you should not accept me. Your life will not be easy. My way is difficult. And she still said, I know God has told me this is the right person. She was that determined to follow Father. And she endured incredible difficulty. For many years, Father was imprisoned in North Korea. She was alone raising her son during the war. Very difficult. But when her church came against her and her family came against her, that's when she changed. And she betrayed Father's trust and love. I have experienced both the sorrow of divorce and the pain of being branded a heretic, but I did not bend. These were things I had to endure on my path to redeem the original sin of humanity. The things I had to endure to move forward on the path toward God's kingdom. It is darkest before the dawn. I overcame the darkness by clinging to God and praying to Him. Other than the fleeting moments that I would spend in sleep, all my available time was spent in prayer. And we've read this chapter actually together, The Sincere Heart is Most Important, where he talks about how intensely he didn't sleep and he took care of the church in the beginning. Within 1 year, I'll say one thing. Within 1 year of establishing his church, he gained 400 members. Within 1 year, he gained 400 members. I think we have to understand the intensity that Father was living with. And I think we can be very clear, without a doubt, that Father is the second coming of Christ. That he will not state that so clearly until the end. He does allude to it. But very clearly we can proclaim that Father was the second coming of the Messiah. So, and now we have to accept also that although Hyungjinim was placed by Father in the position of authority to be the second king of Chanilguk, the second king of the kingdom of heaven that the Messiah comes to establish, the position of the Messiah was passed on to us, not to Hyungjinim. He is not in the position to save people. Although he will do that like Father did, and he will continue to try to do that just like we should. The position of Messiah was passed on to the tribal messiahs. Father took himself and broke himself into 1 billion pieces so that every one of the tribal messiahs, the blessed couples, could grow and blossom into a Messiah like he had done. That's Father and heaven's strategy, is to, through us. So if there's anyone out there who's a blessed couple or who wants to be a blessed couple, understand that we must walk the way Father walked. We must love people at the price of our lives. We must take care of this world. And we must represent true parents. Just like the sixth pledge. If you go back to our sermon on the sixth pledge, that Father asked us to represent, be his symbolic body, to be his representatives and his heirs, and to carry on his mission and his work. That is our responsibility as blessed couples. And whether you're first generation or second generation or 10th generation of our church, it doesn't matter. We must do this work until the world is one family. So that is the final word I want to say, is that all of this is an encouragement to all of us to continue doing home church. And to believe, like I said in the very beginning, no matter how depressed you get or how difficult your course is because of opposition or persecution or difficulty, first of all, no one has had to suffer more than Jesus and Father. Nothing we suffer will ever come close. But no matter what you suffer, God is right there with you. And God will use you to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth if you are willing to keep going forward. And that home church is the place to go, the place to do this. Please be confident, everybody. And if you're not a member of our church, contact me. And I will teach you how to become a blessed couple, how to become a member of our church, how to follow true parents and follow their footsteps and become a true Messiah yourself, and how to help save the world. And we can all do this together. No one has a monopoly on God's love. All of us should become God's representatives. Let's pray. 엄마, 같이 기도합시다. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for using me again, amazingly, to speak your word. Father left so many words behind that if we just sit down and read Father's words, we will be inspired and we can speak the truth with a courageous and brave heart. Father, pave the way to the kingdom of heaven. If every one of our blessed couples stands up and becomes a central blessed family, a blessed central family, and becomes a tribal Messiah and a home church pastor, we can change this world in days. Just weeks and months, we can change this world. We have to be confident and speak the truth. Thank you so much for your love, Father. Thank you so much for the people of the town where I was teaching. Please bless them. Thank you so much for the people that have supported our ministry and are continuing to support our ministry through this difficult time. I want to take inspiration from those people that have supported me, especially in the town where I work. The many people that have supported me. Thank you so much, Father, for your love and your guidance. I pray that we can build the kingdom of heaven on earth in our lifetimes, with our hands, with our hearts. I ask your blessing on all these things, that people who are listening can receive great blessing. And I offer this report in my name and in the name of my wife and myself, Raman and Tamiko Montanaro, a blessed central family. We offer this report. 축복 중심 가정 라만과 타미코 몬타나르 이름으로 보고드립니다. 아주. 아멘. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.